Hi, I'm Heather Darnell, a librarian with the Music Division at the Library of Congress, and today we are joined by Trace Adkins, country superstar in conversation. Trace, it is such an honor to have you here with us today.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
So the first question that I have, I just want to start by taking us way back, and it's, what is your earliest musical memory?
Oh, wow. I think the earliest memory that I have of just being in awe of something musical was standing in the pew in church and standing beside my granddaddy, and he was a bass singer, and he always sang the bass parts on all those hymns, and I just thought he was a great singer, and his son was a great singer. He had a few kids that were great singers, and I guess maybe that's where it came from for me, but I just remember standing beside him and just looking up at him in church and just listening to him sing the bass parts on those hymns and thinking that's what I want to do. That's my first musical memory.
Were you involved singing in the church choir as well growing up?
I didn't do the choir thing very much, but yeah, I mean, I sang in church, and we put together a little quartet, me and three other guys in the church that I went to in our small little town, and we had a lot of fun doing that, singing Southern gospel quartet music for a few years. And that's where I got started.
About how old were you whenever you were doing the quartet?
17.
17. So music must have meant a lot to your family growing up.
No.
No? No?
My mother was a good alto singer. She always sang the alto part in the choir. But my dad, he didn't sing, didn't go to church. That wasn't his thing.
About how old were you whenever you picked up the guitar?
10.
10 years old.
My daddy bought me a real guitar. There are pictures of me when I was a younger child, maybe 4, 5, 6, with one of those Roy Rogers guitars, but I remember I got my first real guitar when I was 10.
Was that something you had asked for and wanted, or a surprise?
I must have asked for it. I don't really remember, and I don't know that I would have seriously asked for it, but I must have mentioned it, and I got one, and then my dad started paying this guy to give me guitar lessons.
Was it country music lessons?
Just playing 3 chords, just trying to learn how to, work my way around he wasn't trying to teach me any particular genre of music, just trying to teach me the neck of the guitar.
What were some of your biggest musical influences in those days, just starting out learning guitar?
Well, it was my father's collection of 33 1/3 LPs, He had everybody, all the classics, He had Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, he had Waylon Jennings who came along, but he had some other stuff too that was even older than that, But I just listened to what my dad listened to.
So early in your career, you spent a lot of time on the Honky Tonk circuit. Can you describe that world, what drew you to it, and when you were drawn to it?
I've walked through the doors that opened for me. I had thought, if a door opened for me in the gospel world, I probably would have walked through that one. But that door never opened, But it wasn't a passion for me I never even dreamed I would have a career in music. That was not. I didn't allow myself to dream like that. Music was my hobby. And the way it happened for me, I was working offshore on a drilling rig, and I would take my guitar out there so that when I wasn't on tower, I'd sit up in the wheelhouse and just mess around. And it got to where guys would come in and request, do some Haggard, do this, do, whatever. And then there was a guy that worked on the drilling rig that introduced me to a guy in Lafayette, Louisiana, who had a band. And he said, you should come down on your 2 weeks off. And I did, and fooled around with them for a while. And then they wanted me to join the band and get in this competition. And we did it, and we won the local thing. And then we won the regionals in Dallas. And then it just, you know, my hobby, and I still say this is just a hobby that got horribly out of control. This wasn't thought out. This wasn't, you know, something that I planned. It just, that's literally how it happened. Doors opened for me. I got lucky, you know, and I just wasn't scared to walk through the door and put my cards on the table, you know. It's a character flaw, I guess. I just don't scare worth a damn. I never have.
So after you started in your friend's band and you won that contest, what would you say is the next big door that opened for you?
Well, that led to about 4 years of playing that honky tonk circuit you were talking about. And wow, it was crazy. I mean, that was the late 80s, and it was wide open in Texas. And I did a lot of crazy stuff. Anyway, I finally had to walk away from it, or I knew it was going to kill me. So I went back to work in the oil field. And then when I'd been back in the oil field for about 3 years, and a guy called me from Nashville, John Milam. He said, "Are you still singing?" And I said, "I don't even sing in the shower anymore." And he said, "Well, one of these days you're going to have to look at yourself in the mirror and ask the question, I wonder what would have happened if." And I said, "If what?" And he said, "If you'd have thrown down the pom-poms and gotten the game." He said, "Nashville's where you need to be. That's where they make, that's where the factory is. They make what you want to be." And the thought of that, you know, facing myself at this age and asking myself that question, I wonder what would have happened if, scared me a lot worse than selling everything I owned and moving to Nashville. So that's what I did. And then the breaks happened. You know, I met the right people, went to the right places, and again, I got lucky.
Before you made it big, what was a memorable performance where you thought, man, I can really do this for a living?
I opened for Hank Snow at Magic Springs in Hot Springs, Arkansas. You have no idea who Hank Snow is.
You're right.
No. He was a Grand Ole Opry member, and by the time, even then, I was like 18, 19 years old. Hank Snow looked like he was 100, you know? But he was doing a show at Magic Springs in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and I got a chance to walk out there with a guitar and sing a couple of songs before he went on stage, and I thought, obviously I've made it. This is it, you know? So I just remember that was my first, what I thought, that was a big deal to me, you know? Of course, nothing happened. Nothing came of it. Nobody remembered it except me.
And this was before or after you went back to the oil field and you had
Oh,
quit?
this was before. Yeah. I just graduated high school at that point. Yeah, it was in the summer, I think, of my senior year of high school, I believe. Yeah,
But you
it
had
was
that
strange.
moment.
Had that one little moment.
What is an important lesson that you learned on the road
On the road.
while you were on the honky tonk circuits?
Oh my gosh. Well, I've said this before, but it's true. I spent 4 years playing the club circuit, honky tonks, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Louisiana, Mississippi, just kind of running back and forth in that circuit there. And the years that I did that, I didn't learn a thing about how to be successful in the music business. But I did learn everything that you're not supposed to do. And I think that's just as, if not more important. So I learned all those lessons when it didn't really matter, before the internet and cell phones, and nobody has a record of any of it. So,
That's great. So I was listening to your discography, and I actually grew up on a lot of your music. I'm from Texas as well, and you're from Louisiana, but I'm from Texas and grew up on a lot of your music. And in your first song, on your first album, There's a Girl in Texas, there's a sense of searching and uncertainty about your identity. The lyrics are, the neon lights have blinded me till I'm in Tennessee, not sure who I am anymore. But on your latest record, in the song Where I Am Today, you seem to have a much more grounded sense of who you are and what you need and want in life. So when you listen across your own catalog, how do you hear yourself changing?
Yeah, actually, this year is my 30th anniversary. That single, There's a Girl in Texas, was my very first single. It came out in June 1996. And this year, we're doing that song in these concerts that we're doing to celebrate the 30th anniversary of that song being on the radio. And when I do it now, it's like, wow, the lyrics to that song mean something completely different than it did when I wrote that song. And it's just crazy the way it has taken on. But at the same time, yeah, because back then I was searching. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just caught in the whirlwind, at that time. And everything was crazy and my life was changing. And now it's like I sing that song and it means something different to me now. It's like I feel like I've found something that I'm content, and I'm happy, and I'm okay with the way things have turned out. And it's kind of like she always knew that that's how it was going to work out, So it's kind of weird.
That's beautiful. So let's talk about everybody's favorite song. So Honky Tonk Badonkadonk became one of country music's major crossover hits. And you've collaborated with artists from very different musical worlds. How important has musical curiosity been for the longevity of your career?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Musical curiosity. I recorded that song because Jamie Johnson, Dallas Davidson, and Randy Houser were all in the Wild Horse Saloon one night, and they were drunk, and they were up on the balcony, and they were doing dance lessons down on the dance floor. And so these three drunks are standing up there looking at all these people down there learning how to do the line dance thing. And one of them remarked, "Yeah, look at the badonkadonk on that one." And then the other one said, "Honky tonk badonkadonk." And then they all sobered up the next day and wrote the song. And then Jamie actually sang the demo of that song. And I don't know if you know Jamie Johnson, but that boy is country as cornbread, and he sang the demo. And so when I heard the song, it made me laugh out loud because the lyric and how silly it was, and Jamie singing it, and I said, "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life," and it is so funny. I'm about to pee on myself, so I said I have to record that because Jamie's just a little more country than I am, and that'll be funny. People will think that's funny coming from me, and that's all the thought that went into it, you know? It wasn't really curiosity. It was just like, oh yeah, hold my beer, watch me do this. I'm gonna do this, Nobody may like it, but I'm gonna do it, Actually, whenever the president of the record label said he was gonna put that out as a single, I went, "You're crazy, man. People out there, are they going to play that on country radio?" I just couldn't believe it. And he did it. And now terrified that somebody's going to chisel that on my headstone someday. You know, and that's what I'll be remembered for. That's why I haven't retired yet, because I have got to do something better than that. You know, I don't want to just be remembered for the Badonkadonk guy, which if I got to be remembered for something, that's okay, but I'd like to find something a little, you know, I mean, a little more dignified.
Well, I'm sure that you've put out, and I know that you've put out a lot of really
I
meaningful
love
songs.
that song. I remember one time we were doing a festival somewhere, and my band almost got into a brawl with another guy's band because the other guy's band said, "How can you guys get up there on the stage and play that every night?" And one of my band guys goes, "Because you see all those buses out there and trucks and stuff? That's how we can do it. Look at your old beat up piece of." That's, you know what I mean? And I was like, attaboy. You got to have some integrity in this business.
Absolutely. So speaking of songwriting, I know that you both write your own songs and you collaborate with other songwriters. Can you take us through your typical process from the moment an idea strikes through whenever it's time to record?
To date, the highest charting song I ever wrote was a number 2. And that song came about from a songwriter buddy of mine. We were both just sitting watching a movie on television one day, and it was on the bus, and it was just like, you know, an actor said that line in the movie. You know, it was phenomenon. It was John Travolta, and I can't remember the lady, Kyra Sedgwick maybe, and she was sitting at his hospital bed, and he knew he was about to die, so he knew he wasn't asking very much of her, and he said, "Would you just love me for the rest of my life?" Knowing that that wasn't very long. And she said, "No, I'll love you for the rest of mine." And we both just looked at each other and went, "Oh my God." And I picked up a guitar, and, you know, and that's where that song came from. It was from that movie. The song didn't have anything to do with the movie, but that hook, I mean, we knew immediately. And I couldn't believe there weren't 1,000 other songwriters in this country that didn't do the same thing when they heard that. I mean, it was obvious to us, okay, that's the hook of a song. Let's write it. And we did. And that's the way they happen a lot of times. And sometimes I'll just hear somebody say something, and, you know, and you just go, okay, that'll sing. You know, and then usually I call up one of my buddies in Nashville, which over the years, I've got a pretty good little Rolodex of some of the finest songwriters in the world. And I'll think, okay, whose wheelhouse is that in? And I'll call that guy and say, "Man, I got an idea. Come help me do this." That's how it happens.
Which songwriters, in country or in other genres, do you most admire?
Oh my goodness. I've always been a fan of the person, the artist that is a songwriter and a virtuoso on his instrument and a good singer. To me, those guys and gals, I mean, that's it. That's an artist to me. I'm a rodeo clown, you know? I mean, those people like that, I mean, they're the cowboys, they're bull riders. Me, I'm a rodeo clown, you know? I've got enough sense to put some of the best musicians in the world on the stage behind me, and then I get to just, you know, go out and sing and have fun, and, you know, but I'm a rodeo clown. I'm not a musician, you know. And when people call me that, sometimes I kind of wince a little bit. It's like, I don't call myself that. I'm not a musician. I know a lot of musicians, and I know a lot of great songwriters, but I don't claim to be either of those things. I had a friend of mine one time say, "You're the best lazy songwriter I know." Because that's the way I'll do it sometimes. I'll get a hook that I know is a good hook, and I'll just call a songwriter and go, "Okay, man, here's the idea. Do it." And a couple weeks later, song shows up. And I don't put my name on it. I don't try to take co-writer credit because I didn't do the work, you know. I just heard something and I knew it would make a great song, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm a better editor than I am a writer, actually.
Well, speaking of your singing, you have one of the most recognizable voices in country music. When did you realize your voice was a major part of your musical identity?
When I was singing bass in the gospel quartet. Yeah. That's when I learned, wow, the girls like the bass singer. Great, because that's all I got. I was doing my very first radio tour when my first album was coming out. And Capitol Records started me on the West Coast, up in the corner in Seattle. We started working our way down the West Coast. And we got to Bakersfield. And the radio station there in Bakersfield was owned by Buck Owens, and Buck lived in Bakersfield. And that day it just happened to be raining, so he wasn't on the golf course. And Buck was in his office. And so he wanted me to come in, and I went in his office and he closed the door and wouldn't let anybody else come in. And so it was just myself, Buck Owens, and he's sitting right in front of me. And he said, sing a Merle Haggard song. Now sing one of my songs. Now sing one of your songs. And then, you know, I'll do something, you know. And so there were a couple of times when I would hit that low note, you know. And Buck told me, he said, Trace, that low note that you can hit, you should do that in every song that you do, because that's really all you got going for you. And that's what he told me, and then I started doing that. I do it too much, but you know what? That's something I can do that, as far as I know, there's not anybody else that can do it. You know, I mean, there aren't any of those kids right now singing country music that can do it. They just can't. So I got something that I can do, you know, so I lean on it just a little too heavily, I suppose.
Earlier in the interview, you talked about your first musical memory being, was it your grandfather hitting those low notes in the choir? Do you feel a special connection to him now that you're singing bass on the world stage?
Well, I'm thankful to him for whatever that was that he passed along, you know. And I've tried to share it and use it to the best of my ability, you know. He was a great, he influenced me a lot more ways than just music. He was a big influence in my life. He was a student of history, and he piqued my interest in that respect too.
Well, speaking of history, when historians look back on this era of country music, what do you hope they understand about the culture surrounding it?
About the culture surrounding it, wow. This is a very transitional time that we find ourselves in the music business these days. I mean, AI has come along and upset the apple cart. You're hearing things nowadays that you don't know if that's real or not. And most people out there can't tell the difference, you know. But I was in the studio just the other day with 8 of the finest musicians in the world, and we started playing a song for them that we were going to use to pattern something else that we were going to do, and they immediately, as soon as it started playing, that song wasn't 3 notes in, and they went, oh, we're going to be sumo wrestling today. They knew exactly they knew it was AI, you know. Mm-hmm. Trained ears can pick that stuff out. Most people can't tell the difference, and that's a scary thing, you know. So I don't know. I will be curious to see too, decades down the road. It may not take that long, I don't know, but what the decisions that we make right now are very important as far as the future of music and there being legitimate artists still in the music business. I mean, we're in danger of messing this up. We better be very careful.
What do you think country music either loses or gains with the advent of AI
It
writing
loses its
songs?
soul. It loses its heart, you know? I mean, at the same time, it opens doors for people that may not have an opportunity any other way. I mean, you know, you can hear a song now that a writer will, basically a poet, will come up with a lyric and then they say, how can I put this to music? And perhaps they can't afford to do that. They can't afford to go into a studio and hire these musicians and create a track, you know, for this poem that they've written. But they can type it into AI and hum a little something in there and then voila, there, you know. So it's just, like I say, it's a very strange time that we find ourselves in right now.
Well, I'm coming up here on the last question, and we have something that we would actually like to share with you in the interview. I'm just going to get it out here. So this is, let me open it up, a handwritten copy of the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key. You can see his portrait right here. This was written in 1840. And my final question for you is, looking upon this handwritten copy of the Star-Spangled Banner, what does it mean to you today that you're going to be singing the Star-Spangled Banner here at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. for the 25th anniversary of the Veterans History Project?
It's always a privilege when I get to sing the anthem. I love doing it. I've said many times, I'll sing the national anthem at the opening of a used car lot. I just love to sing it. It's such an honor to me. And I've done it at the World Series. I've done it, you know, NFL games, basketball games, car races. I've done it everywhere. And I always enjoy doing it. However, it still is the only song that still makes me nervous before I do it.
Really?
It does. Because if you mess up the Star-Spangled Banner, it's on YouTube forever. You know?
That's true.
I mean, if I mess up one of my songs, nobody cares. You know, nobody cares, you know, but you mess that up. So I always put that pressure on myself every time before I do it. Oh my gosh, I hope today's not the day that I actually mess it up.
It won't be. It won't be. All right, well, that wraps up our interview. Thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been such an honor.
My pleasure. Thank you.